Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, the story that's going to unravel is The Writer and the Throne. It's about a war of the gods, but not just any gods. Pretty much all of them: Roman, Egyptian, Greek, Norse. And the author is C.T. Ortega. Caleb, thank you for joining us from Washington State and the greater Seattle area by Skype. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure. So this was an incredible, epic journey. I love the way that all of the gods were from different sections of the world. Actually, the way they appeared in real life almost. But the whole struggle, and tell us about your background, how you got into mythology, because you obviously know a lot about the gods, their personality types, things that they did were right on. So
I appreciate it. I was always the young man who wanted to hang around the older, wiser folks. I always wanted to be a philosopher. I always thought that was the pinnacle more than anything else that shows that I'm the wisest human being kind of thing. So I always was drawn to that. So any philosophy book that was in the house, I read it. Anytime my dad, who is a philosopher in his own right, I would sit down and listen, and he might not know it, but I did steal a lot of information from him at the time as a kid. And as I matured and grew, you start learning to separate them, and you see these distinctions and what's the difference between Hinduism versus, we'll say, Christianity. And I fell in love with the ideas of the strength and the differences. And essentially, I mean, that's really what the book comes to be about. Is it's more philosophies with a god in front of them than, say, Zeus himself. It's what's behind him, what's his theology, and why doesn't that work versus Odin? What's his dilemma? So I've always loved philosophy. I've always been drawn to it. So that's really the catalyst for the book.
But what about your background? Because there's a lot of fighting. The writer, the main character in the book, is journaling everything. He's meeting all these, gods from
Right.
all these different time periods in our world.
Right.
And that parallel between death and going to heaven or someplace else.
Right.
How did you tie all of that together? Because it's exceptionally well done. I can't wait to see the rest of the series. It was so well done.
Yes. I want to tell you that I sat down and thought about this and had this amazing plan set up and outlined it. And the truth is, I would absolutely be lying to you. I was going for a drive to Mount Rushmore. I'm obviously thinking about philosophy. When I drive, especially that long of a distance, it's about 18 hours where I live. I drive in silence, and I just sit down and think, and I'm looking at the mountains, and I'm just having a good time. And literally just got hit with the idea that what if you take free will, for example, and where does free will and choice and democracy come from? Well, it's Greece. And so you take Zeus and you make him nothing more than the most dominant power of free will. And then the opposing view, which is fate, and then the motivation that you can really do anything if you know your fate at the end. And I just took these two opposite ideas. That was where it initially began, and it hit, and it just hit. And then all of a sudden, it's Osiris, it's Lord Shiva, it's the Sangwandati, and all these, the Taoism, Hinduism, and all these philosophies just hit. And honestly, my initial thought was this would be a great book. I'm hopeful that somebody would write this one day. That was my first thought. And the second thought was, well, you can do it. And I've never written, to be honest with you. It's out of my realm. It's out of my league. And in all truth, I wasn't prepared to sit down and do it. By the end of the car ride, I had already began mapping it out. So I want to tell you that I had this great idea, but the truth was, I think the great idea more or less found me in that way.
Wow. So what's your background? What's your full-time job? What have you done over the years to I know something in your background has to add to the elements of this book, whether it's the fight scenes, because
Sure.
there's war, there's those struggles for power, for being recognized.
Absolutely. So at 18 years old, I joined the military, and I spent 20 years in, and there's just these amazing moments that you have. And I've been overseas numerous times. I'll use Korea as one of them. And you see soldiers, and they're not US soldiers. You see foreign soldiers, and you look at them and you're seeing them face to face, and they have the same face that you have. They have the same feelings that you have. I'd much rather be at home. I'd much rather be watching a movie with my family, but I'm here with you and it's negative 20 degrees and we're having a standoff moment. Or in the Middle East, with everything going on, you go over there and you see different human beings. And the truth is, who's right, who's wrong, it kind of gets blurred in just the beauty that this is another person. And the last thing I would want to do, at least for myself, is I would never want to hurt anybody, no matter what's going on. So what it did, my time in growing, it matured me to try to look at the other perspective. What's going on with their view? And in all truth, that's what the book has this angle of, is I don't want to have a good guy or bad guy, because in my idea, everybody believes themselves to be a good guy. So as the reader goes, I want them to have the same feeling that I have, that if I go to the Middle East, they're not the bad guys. They just have a different perspective. And so every war is basically drawn on whoever wins is the good guy, right? That's one of the big ideas that we have. So that was one of them. The other is I grew up in a very religious, spiritual, acknowledging home where there was many different philosophy books. And so, I'd pick up a Calvin and Hobbes and learn a little comic book philosophy, and then pick up Taoist book and start reading that as well. And so it was just always there in my life. So matching, I would say, my military experience, matching some of the true life experiences that I did have in the military, where near deaths experiences, I think it causes you to be an introspective person for sure. And I really try to put that into the book. I didn't want it to just be Thor punches Zeus or something silly. I wanted the reader to be frustrated and not know who was going to win, and really almost not really be sure who they wanted to win, essentially.
I think you did that exceptionally well.
Thank you.
So it's your first book. How long did it take to write?
It took me about 45 days. When I tell you it poured out of me. From beginning to end, along with actually the first round of edits, yes.
45 days?
Yes. And
that's it? That's really good. I mean, some authors take 20 years to write a book like this.
Right. And I'm going to use the term, I did not feel, I struggled in regard to whether it was good, in all truth, because I did not write it for 20 years, because I don't have a background as a writer, because all I did was have an idea and I sat down and wrote it and let it pour out of me. I was very nervous when I sent it to the editor. I will say that. And by the time he had read by the time he was midway through the first book, I had already written the second and third. So it's still flowing very quickly.
Oh, that's great. We can tell that you had a lot of knowledge of these characters, because you give locations, items, things, the immortals, the Duduati. Is it Asgardians? AS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But you outline who they are. You give a short definition of who these guards are, and they're all accurate. And then I love the questions. So the questions for readers, let's just give an example. And then you can answer the question as the author and the reader. So did any of the gods in the book in particular resonate with you And was it because you are similar in ideas or because they're the opposite of you and that attracted you?
For me personally, each character is in some way, shape, or form a reflection of at least a personality trait within me. But I would tell you absolutely Segment kicks off very quickly. And she has a very small role up until maybe the last quarter of the book is where you start really seeing her personality shine. And I became enamored with her. She's against all philosophies. She's driven by one purpose and one purpose only, and she does it with an absolute focus. Whether it's right or wrong is irrelevant to her. She just has a true desire to see the conclusion that she wants to conclude with, and that's not really me. I'm much more thought out. I'm much more detailed. I'm willing to give myself up to the greater idea kind of thing. And so it would be the opposites attract. I just really liked writing her because she's a person of focus.
And what about the writer? I think from what you've told us so far, the writer seems the most like what you've described. He's an observer. He knows that he can talk to these people, find out what's going on. It's kind of like being in the military. You're there to observe, you're there to participate, but you can't interact with changing their government, their way of thinking, that type of thing. That was
No, yes, absolutely. I would say he's a projection of me at 19 or 20 years old when you're out of your depths. And the first few chapters, I try to warn folks is that you're going to be out of your depth. And that was done purposefully to be thrown into a room with hundreds of gods. And if you don't know who they are, you don't have time to stop and research. You're just like Aaron, as far as being the writer goes, you're lost. And that's what that feeling is absolutely what it's like. I would say the first 4 years you're in the military, you're just confused. Everything is different. It's a different language. It's a different culture. Everybody's intimidating. And so I would say I lived what Aaron lived his 1 or 2 first days there, my first 4 years from 18 to 22 for sure. Yeah.
the other thing that it hits on is how a reporter is supposed to be objective, unbiased, and not interfere in the story, just bring it forward.
Yes. And he's 19 and he doesn't know that. So a few of the events he wants to tell somebody, he wants to push the story and he wants to fix things, but he's continually told you can't, you just have to let things play out. And one of the main things when it comes to the book is letting the story tell itself and letting it push forward. And I wanted that natural inclination from him, but at the same time, I did not want him to be the main character. I want him to be the person that lets you into the world, as he's not your Harry Potter. He's not going to be the one to save the day. He is going to introduce you to everybody else, and then you're essentially in his eyes as well. So that was the aim with him, is that he's your eyes to the book.
He's definitely your eyes, and he challenged us as readers to question our interpretation of the way we think of different people and more questions to ask. You know, when you're looking at two sides of a story, you challenge us to ask more questions, to dig a little deeper, to keep reading into the middle of the night for hours on end. Thank you. So you definitely be sleepless.
Thank you. Yes. One of the best ideas that I've ever heard from philosophy-wise is that you should take every issue that you see and view it from all 360 angles. And what you end up doing is you will see your enemy's perspective. And that's one of the major ideas in the Art of War, which there's numerous things I've stolen from the Art of War to put in this book, is if you can get into the mind of your enemy, so to speak, then you can understand what they're going to do. But what I wanted to do with the book is get you into the mind of the enemy and give you also their heart and their emotions. So you don't just see one group as the enemy, you actually feel for both groups, and had fun doing it.
Yeah, you pulled it off. What else did you do? Did you go to college for creative writing or philosophy, anything?
Of course, you take your electives, philosophy. I do have a degree in business management, but that was really specifically towards my military career, and I wanted to make myself marketable in all things. And that's one of the things is as you get out of the military, it's a big transition. I mean, 20 years is not just a career path, it is a lifestyle. And so as I got out, I wanted to make sure I'm prepared for the next phase of my life. I would tell you, absolutely suffer from imposter syndrome when it comes to being an author. Just to say that I am an author, I don't feel that way. If I'm in a room full of people who have been writing since they were 8 and had that desire, I definitely feel inadequate. And when I speak with other writers, I blush a little and hide behind my idea and saying, I'm sorry, I actually just started writing May 1st this year. And I'm on book 5, and it becomes almost a psychological battle sometimes with them versus me. And I don't imply it to be, but again, you see folks writing their books for 5 and 6 years, and each book is different. So we should never really try to challenge each other with timelines or something silly. But I do know the feeling of sitting down next to somebody and saying, no, I never thought about writing in any way, shape, or form. I just began May 1st, and I'm concluding a 5-book series. I would say no later than February 2021. So with more ideas to come.
Wow. So tell us about the team that helped you bring this about, because it's definitely a team effort and it's exceptional writing. I was never let down. I never had to go back and reassess the whole paragraph and say, what was he trying to tell me?
Right.
So it was fluid. It was enjoyable. It was an epic journey.
Awesome. I appreciate it. So the first person I spoke with his name is Jim Bessie. He's actually a North Carolina EFA, which is the Editorial Freelancers Association president. And at the time I did not know it. And he was actually going for the position, kind of kept it secret from me. But it began very organic. We just had a conversation through social media. And I said, I need somebody who can edit very well, be willing to cut words, beat it up, and know that I have no ego about it. And one thing I had told him was, I don't mind if you beat it up, but at the end of the day, I need the story to be told. And I want it to be told in this specific way. So if you can help me do that, I'm willing to. And this was part of my immaturity in writing is I just need you to be able to do the best editing job, because I know what I'm giving you is nowhere near a final product. And I couldn't have found someone better, in all truth. He's a line by line, very detailed editor. And the first page, I sent him the first 2 or 3 chapters just to kind of feel each other out. There was more red marks than there were my writing at the end of it. And I said, this is the person, because they're not afraid. He's not afraid to tell me, you need to change some words. So he was absolutely amazing, Jim Bessie. And then I knew, I would say midway through that, I needed a second editor. You want that second pair of eyes. And my own, again, just lack of confidence, I wanted somebody who's already written. I wanted somebody who is confident. And social media provided another one. Her name is Emily Knight. She's actually been on your show. She's written 2 amazing books, and I immediately enjoyed both of them within a couple of days of getting them. And she has a great, dark, witty storyteller. And I wanted that. I wanted for my battles to be better than what I felt they were at the time. And I wanted the story to have angles and thoughts. And she nailed it. She added these little ideas. And from her angle being, she's mid-20s at best, from what she knows, it was so different. And it was just a great perspective. And once that was edited, I said, okay, I'm good. And I wanted it through conversation. I ended up having one more person, and I just asked her to be an ARC reader. Would you like to read it? Her name is Elias Chase the stories on IG. And I said, would you please read it? I'd just like to get your opinion on it. And she read it and she said, I can't text it to you. I need a video. And we ended up doing a 2-hour video where she yelled at me for certain characters, and she had such great opinions. I ended up altering the book 1 or 2 more times prior to concluding it. So those are my 3, and I've linked them that they are going to be my 3 for all 5 books for sure. And they're the best. Absolutely.
Well, I love the way it all came together. I love the definitions on the characters because there's so many, but you can go back, you can research them and find out a little more about them. And you were really true to the mindsets or how they were portrayed through history. So that was just key. And then the questions at the end, I think are really good for readers and writing groups or reading groups that get together because it challenges them to go back and maybe read it one more time or, start writing their answers.
And the questions actually came from Elias Chase. She sent me a message after she had read the book. I really enjoyed it. I think it would be a good idea if you post some questions at the end because, again, what I'm trying to do is make a youthful philosophy book hiding in a great action. So as she described it, it immediately hit that that's a beautiful idea. So I wrote that the next morning and sent it to her, and we went through the questions together. And perfect idea. I thought it was really, really great. And in regard to the gods themselves, we stay away from 2 topics, right? Political and religious. And here I am diving into absolutely the religious side of the house. And I know that religious people may read it. And the last thing I want to do is offend somebody because my goal is to get somebody just to view the opposite side and still have that exact respect. So I'm trying to do the opposite of cause any division. So when it came to, for example, we use Lord Shiva, I organically, I know a few Hindu friends. I called them. I said, would you please take a look at this? How can I best represent him? And in conversation, I had my idea, but knowing somebody from India who grew up where it's common, his pictures, Lord Shiva's pictures are in their restaurants. Lord Shiva's pictures are all over the place. He's saturated in who and what he is. And so he really helped me. I had a lot of good conversations with a lot of good people who were able to educate me. So this is not a brainchild of just myself for sure. It's a conglomeration of folks who really did help me make sure I didn't mess that aspect up.
Well, I think it's a good conversation piece for young people all over the place to come together, to talk about it, to open the subject of religions and choices, how you believe in God, or, the free will versus fate aspect that runs along through the whole storyline. It was just seriously incredible. I had so much fun reading it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I had a great time writing it.
Oh, it shows. And it's just amazing that you did it in 45 days for your first book, even with all your friends helping out, because this is huge. It's how many? So it's almost 500 pages. How many pages are the other books in the series?
This is a good question. So the first one, because I had to introduce the world, I had to introduce and describe every god. It is longer. This was somewhere in the vicinity of about 95,000 words. The second book is closed. It's editing right now, and it's going to end somewhere in the vicinity of 70 to 75. And I'm going to say it's going to be the same for 3 and 4. Book 5, I do expect to be a little bit longer. It's probably going to be closer to book 1. So we'll be somewhere in the vicinity of 500,000 words once we're all said and done with them. Yeah, I'm about 15 chapters into the last book right now.
Wow. Do you know how it's going to end? Did you plan it ahead?
No, I am the pantser writer, and it's... You spend 3/4 of your book digging yourself into a hole, and then the last quarter problem solving. How did I get myself in? How can I get myself out? And so writing the first book was a pleasure. Concluding it, saying, I feel like I got the right ending because I did not know when I started. When I began writing the second book, it was about midway through when I knew, I would say, the events that I'm going to use to end it, but who lives, who dies, I do not have that answer. And I'll go back to Miss Elias Chase. She's the one, it was in one of the videos, she had made just the smallest of all points. And I went and I ruminated on it. I thought about it. And it was just, again, it was one of these epiphany type moments that I knew this is how it's going to end. This is who lives. This is who dies. And so I now have the ending. Absolutely do now.
Yeah. And I like how you brought in other words. And I think it's great for a fifth grader to read. The language that you use throughout the book, I think it's great, fifth grade to adult, honestly, because of the way you wrote it, because you didn't have to use, a rapid thing of swears or gore to describe things. I mean, there are some awful things that happen along the way, but it's written in a nice way that I would allow my fifth grader to read it.
That's awesome. Yes, that's awesome to hear. I had aimed it for somewhere in the vicinity of, I would say, a mature 15 and 16-year-old. That this is definitely comparable to your normal PG-13 movie. That's high action and stuff, that you're going to see things. But my main thing is that I wanted to write it in a sense of how it would be spoken. I didn't want to use terms and ideas that the person had to go to a dictionary, or that that it becomes whimsical or fantasy driven. I wanted to make it as close as I can, although I'm talking about gods and heavens and war, as close to reality as humanly possible. That this is something that it just feels 2020 type reading. I didn't want to compare myself to, or I didn't want to write in a fashion compared to an older, more fantasy level book.
Yeah, that's funny. 2020 totally fits 2020. It's full of the unexpected. It was just like such an unexpected adventure that was enjoyable, that drove you to read to the very last page and actually read through every last page of the questions, the dictionary, because you just wanted more. You wanted a hint at what was going to come next.
I appreciate it. Well, what I can tell you is book one is very philosophy driven. And we've talked about that. Book two, I wanted to go in a completely different angle. I wanted to take it farther. How can I take this story and not rewrap it in a new way? Where book one has hundreds of gods and book one has 15, give or take, point of views, book two has one point of view, only one God, and we dive into that God's mind. And this God, because of the actions of book one, is going through trauma. They're the only ones. They're one of the few that didn't come out with a happy ending. And that's what I wanted to explore. So the second book is much more psychologically based. It's based on anger. It's based on rage. It's based on a level of depression and people going to dark places. And how do you come out of it? So it's still philosophy, but it's more psychological. And I wanted to I want a teenager to read this and come out with a completely different experience than their first one. Any reader, and that was the goal. So by the end of book two, now you've experienced what I would hope is the full world, takes you deeper. And now the second book, because of the psychology level, I would hope that the reader's even more invested emotionally in what's going to happen and who's going to win, who's going to make it to the end, and how it's going to go, without having any clue, because in truth, there is no true antagonist or protagonist. So I want to leave the reader absolutely clueless until the very end.
Well, I think that sounds like a logical plan. And thanks for sharing so much about the writer and the thorn. And until next time, keep asking questions. And if you want a book that will challenge you and keep you tuned in to the very last page, The Writer and the Thorn by C.T. Ortega will definitely do that.